the International Military Tribunal for the Far East sentences you to death by hanging.
In May 2018, in the court where German Nazis were tried, Professor David Cohen from Stanford University is scheduled to give a special speech.
For too long, Nuremberg was in the spotlight and Tokyo was ignored, but they're both of equal importance.
In Shanghai, people barely know that the building on the street is the headquarters for Japan's opium trafficking in China.
日本的毒化行为是一种被隐藏的国家罪行。
In Singapore, Mr. Law Wen-ki expresses his condolences to his father in his own way.
在我的脑袋这个永远忘不了。
In Kanchanaburi, Australian civil engineer Rod Beattie is searching for historical clues in the Thailand jungle.
We must record history accurately for the future.
People around the world in different places and on different occasions are commemorating a trial. It is the Tokyo trial, also known as the trial of the century. This trial of the century lasted for 913 days, during which the prosecution and the defense presented 419 witnesses and 4,335 pages of documentary evidence. It has a court record as long as 50,000 pages, and over 200,000 people attended. In the final verdict, there are 1,213 pages describing the atrocities Japan committed in Asia and the Pacific. Today, the final judgment, the symbol of the trial, is filed in the archives of countries all over the world, in languages such as Japanese, English, and Chinese. What did the trial of the century try 70 years ago? The answer is widespread. It lies in the US, Germany, Australia, Singapore, and the Philippines. This is Nuremberg, the second largest city in Bavaria, Germany. It was the site of the Congress of Nazi Party representatives by order of Hitler. Before World War II, 500,000 Nazi members from all over Germany came here every year to hold a week-long party congress. Nuremberg witnessed the madness of Nazi Germany. By the end of the war, Germany had suffered great defeat and finally surrendered unconditionally after the Soviet army took Berlin. To punish Nazi Germany for its war crimes, the Allies organized an international military tribunal to use legal means to punish the war criminals. And Nuremberg, the original Congress site of Nazi Party representatives, was chosen as the site of the tribunal. On August the 8th, 1945, the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain and France gathered in London to sign the London Charter, which became the legal basis for the Nuremberg trial. The Charter clearly listed 3 categories of crimes committed by the war criminals of Nazi Germany: crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. They were called Class A, B, and C war crimes. The crimes against peace, or the Class A war crimes, for the first time in history became the main cause of action in an international court.
Many people today think that the Nuremberg trial was about the Holocaust. The Nuremberg trial was not about the Holocaust. That was one of the many criminal policies, campaigns that the German government was charged with. The primary crime was crimes against peace.
The later charter of the International Military Tribunal for the Far East inherited the essence of the Nuremberg Charter. Among the 55 causes of action presented by the prosecutor in the Tokyo court, 36 were in relation to crimes against peace. The 28 Class A war criminals included several Japanese prime ministers, foreign ministers, war ministers, and navy ministers. All were senior cabinet officials who participated in creating the policy of aggression.
The major task of the judge is to make findings on crimes against peace. That is to say whether the Japanese planned, prepared, and initiated and waged aggressive war. Bulk of the judgment was spent on reconstructing that history of the war of aggression.
Sato Kenryo was Tojo Hideki's lieutenant. He once said of himself on being named a Class A war criminal, "I felt it was honorable to be a Class A war criminal. I felt like I was getting promoted." Sato was not an officer of high rank, but he mistook the designation Class A war criminal as being an expression describing military rank.
These trials are taking place, Nuremberg and Tokyo, at the same time that the United Nations is being established. The concern of the international community at the time was to ensure that another world war like this did not happen again. And that meant that establishing crimes against peace as the most serious international crime was an overriding priority.
During World War II, Japan began its aggression in China. On September 18, 1931, the South Manchurian Railway, which was the property of the Japanese army, was blown up near Shenyang. Japan's Kwantung Army blamed this on the Chinese army and used it as an excuse to bombard Beida-Yin. This is known to history as the Mukden Incident. 3 days later, Alfred Cao-Kerzi, China's representative at the League of Nations, accused Japan of aggression against Chinese territory and breaking the covenant of the League. After 4 months of discussion, the League of Nations sent an investigation team led by British Marquis Lytton to China and Japan. The Commission delivered a 145-page independent report of its investigation, known as the Lytton Report, to the Council. The report clearly stated that, without declaration of war, a large area of what was indisputably Chinese territory has been forcibly seized by the armed forces of Japan and has been separated from the rest of China. Lytton's report received great attention from the international community. In 1933, the League of Nations convened a conference to discuss the disputes in Manchuria. Japan's Minister Plenipotentiary Matsuoka Yosuke had no choice but to respond to the declaration.
Find it impossible to accept the report adopted by the Assembly.
Under pressure from the international community, Japan declared its withdrawal from the League of Nations. Incapable of stopping its aggression, Japan was pushed into international isolation. Baron Shirahara, Japan's foreign minister in 5 cabinets beginning from 1924, appeared in the Tokyo court as a witness. He testified that a week before the Mukden incident, he had received a report that a major event was about to take place in the Manchuria area. Shortly before the Manchurian incident, I received confidential reports and information that the Kwantung Army was engaged in amassing troops for some military purpose. Another important witness was Morishima Morito, a diplomat who was Japan's acting consul general in Shenyang during the Mukden incident.
Was it not a part of a general anti-Japanese feeling throughout China?
確かに一部であります。特に東山省において強かったと申し上げます。
Morito recalls on the night of September 18, 1931, Colonel Itagaki said, Japan must take appropriate defense measures through the use of military force. I tried to reason with him that we should resort to peaceful negotiations in an effort to adjust the matter. Colonel Itagaki then chastised me and wanted to know if the office of the Consul General intended to interfere with the right of military command. At this point in the conversation, Major Hanaya unsheathed his sword in an angry gesture and stated that he would kill anyone who endeavored to interfere. This was the famous sword dispute. Japan's cabinet could no longer stop the invading march of the Kwantung Army.
I think in terms of crimes against peace, whether or not there was a conspiracy, there was an attack on Manchuria.
Aggression against Manchuria was just the first step. Japan's ambition was far more than that. In 1937, the Marco Polo Bridge incident marked the beginning of the all-out war of aggression against China. The Japanese army quickly took Peiping, Shanghai, Nanjing, Hankou, Guangzhou, and finally Hainan in February 1939. But the expanded war against China exposed Japan directly to an enemy it least wanted. On December 7th, 1941, Japan made a sudden air attack against Hawaii. The Pacific War had broken out. Following that, the Japanese army quickly occupied the Philippines, Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies. In a few months, almost all of Southeast Asia fell into the hands of the Japanese. And Japan declared it the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, which was much desired by the Japanese government.
Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku, who was the planner of the Pearl Harbor attack, is said to have told the Japanese Prime Minister that he hoped that war with the United States could be avoided.
More or less everybody in the room realizes Japan cannot win this war.
There was a realistic assessment. Japan couldn't last, especially against the United States and its allies, for too long.
So why do they do this? Because they're unwilling to give up China.
Resources became a point of dispute, largely because Japan needed these resources to fight the war in China, and the United States was not going to say, okay, we'll give it to you so that you can defeat the Chiang Kai-shek government or to fight against the Communist Red Army. So they could not reconcile the differences. Absolutely not.
Starting from China, Japan went on to invade the entire Asia-Pacific region. And this was clearly brought out in court at the Tokyo trials. The Tokyo court made its judgment by focusing on the causal relationship between the China-Japan War and the Pacific War, and proved responsibility for the war lay with Japan. In its judgment, it says, "We have come to the conclusion that the charge of conspiracy to wage aggressive wars has been made out, that these acts are already criminal in the highest degree." Apart from General Matsui Iwani, all 24 war criminals on trial were convicted guilty of crimes against peace. They all paid the price for waging aggressive war. In 1982, in an old bookstore in Tokyo, Japanese scholar Eguchi Keiichi accidentally found a document about Japan's policy of opium poisoning in China's Mengjiang region. With this important source, Eguchi devoted himself to further research and finally published a book named China-Japan Opium War. In the book, Eguchi produced extensive information and graphics, pointing out it's seldom seen in history when a war is accompanied by the production, sale, and use of opium in the occupied areas. As early as 1919, the New York Times reprinted an article from a Chinese newspaper, the China Herald. The article explicitly unveiled secret opium smuggling in China by the Japanese government. Morphia no longer can be purchased in Europe. The seat of the industry has been transferred to Japan.
It made a significant part of the prosecution's case, although not in connection with war crimes, but rather in connection with crimes against peace. The prosecution did attach importance to presenting evidence of opium trade to show that how the Japanese, after taking control of Manchuria, started this business to generate income in support of their next phase of war of aggression.
In the Tokyo court, Japan's invasion against China by opium was referred as a crime against peace. Both Chinese and American prosecution teams attached great importance to obtaining evidence of the opium smuggling. American prosecutor David Sutton personally came to China to collect testimony from witnesses. Based on the evidence, Sutton issued a 45-page report regarding the opium trade in China. Among the witnesses was a British policeman, Harold Frank Gill. On August 28, 1946, Harold Gill appeared in the court as a prosecution witness.
What is your full name?
Harold Frank Gill.
What was the situation with regard to opium in the Shanghai area immediately prior to the Japanese occupation?
Prior to the Sino-Japanese hostilities, the nationalist government of China, under Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek, had embarked upon a program aimed at the eradication of opium and narcotics in China.
Gill stated that whereas the Chinese government ordered the death penalty for opium smugglers, the situation deteriorated after 1938. Japan and its puppet government officials set up a monopoly bureau to handle the sale of opium. Minor Bates, a history professor at the University of Nanking, made an independent investigation into Japan's opium aggression and wrote 3 reports on the subject over 3 consecutive years. In the reports, Bates says he estimated that 1/8 of the Nanking population was using heroin. The addicts included children and young people of both sexes. The Japanese government once asserted, as long as 40% of the Chinese population use opium, China will be a permanent colony of Japan.
We often think of genocide as just being about killing people with the intention to destroy a national, ethnic, racial, religious group. But also, one of the other ways you can commit genocide is by serious bodily or mental harm. And the mental harm was added at the behest of China specifically because of the opium trade and how that played out in China.
On North Sichuan Road in the Hongkou district of Shanghai is situated a building that was used by Japan's Secret Service in the city during World War II. Hongji Shantang was located here. During the war, in the disguise of a charity medicine shop, it was actually Japan's biggest drug trafficking organization in China.
Do you swear to state according to your conscience and truth not to conceal anything from or to add anything whatever to the truth?
Satomi Hajime was the founder of the Hongji Shantang and testified in court as a prosecution witness.
What is your full name? Satomi Hajime to moushimasu. What business were you engaged in Shanghai since 1937 until 1945? 12年以来、上海におきましては、アヘンに関する仕事に従事しておりました。For how long a period did you sell this opium for the Special Service Organization? 私の記憶からいたしますれば、そう長い期間じゃありません。約半年か7、8ヶ月じゃない。それから公安員ができまして、公安員がこれを扱うと。
The Ko-A Inn that Satomi Hijime mentioned was set up by the Japanese government in December 1938 to supervise Chinese affairs. The president of the Ko-A Inn was Japan's prime minister, and the vice presidents were the 4 ministers of the Army, Navy, Finance and Foreign Affairs, who were known as the Cabinet in the Cabinet. Therefore, arguably anyone holding key positions from 1938 to 1945 must have been involved in opium trafficking directly or indirectly.
日本的兴亚院1年要在东京召开1次东京鸦片会议。这个鸦片会议就是讲鸦片怎么种，然后怎么收缴，收缴上来之后怎么制毒，然后怎么分配的。实际上，日本侵华战争期间，在中国的毒化行为是政府或者是军队有目的、有计划的推行的，是一种被隐藏的国家罪行。
Opium aggression has long been held in contempt by Western civilizations and was restricted by several international conventions. Then why did Japan, as the first Asian country longing for integration with the Western powers, blatantly commit drug crimes?
据我的研究，红旗善堂存在大约5年时间，5年时间，他一共赚了12亿日元。当时建造一艘航空母舰就是需要8000万日元，所以他4年期间建造的就可以建造10几艘，将近15艘航空母舰。
It's clear that Japan blatantly broke international treaties and used the money from the opium business to support its war of aggression. Substantial funds were obtained for the Japanese. The effect on the morale of the Chinese population from the tremendous increase in drug addicts can well be imagined. Drug aggression was not separately mentioned during the conviction of individual criminals. But Hoshino Naoki, the person responsible for developing Manchukuo, and Kaya Okinori, a member of the Ko-A Inn, as well as Suzuki Teiichi, president of the Planning Board of Japan, were sentenced to life imprisonment for economic aggression against China. Along with aggressive war came large-scale massacres in almost every place Japan invaded. The most appalling is undoubtedly the one in Nanjing, China. After entering Nanjing on December 13, 1937, the Japanese invaders slaughtered residents for as long as 6 weeks. However, Nanjing was not the only victim. To present detailed evidence, prosecutors from different countries investigated several killing fields and brought witnesses and documentary evidence to the Tokyo court. Many Chinese witnesses appear in the documentary footage.
You are now called to testify as a witness in this case now before the tribunal, and you have a duty to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. Mr. President, the witness is sworn.
What is your name? Of what country are you a citizen? Where is your home? You have before you prosecution document which purports to be signed by you, dated 28 June 1946. Did you sign that statement?
是自己签字，可是不是我自己写的。
Are the facts stated therein true and correct?
是。
In the court, Prosecutor Sutton read Jai Shu Tung's affidavit.
I am 22 years of age. When the Japanese troops came to my village, most of the residents ran from the village. They gathered together about 60 old men and women and young boys and girls and forced them into a house. They set the house afire, shooting those who attempted to escape. corpses lying outside the house were riddled with bullet holes.
At that time, the interpreter asked me.
During the war, the young and robust Jai Shu-tung was kidnapped and shipped to Japan as a laborer. He was not freed until the end of the war.
当时他问了以后，这个法官问了以后，我当然不愿意加和你们，他也没说什么，把我送到日本来了。
We don't know how many places in China massacres like that occurred, but we know there were probably hundreds of them. They occurred all over. The treatment by the Japanese army of civilian populations and of prisoners of war was quite similar everywhere that the Japanese army operated.
Singapore, one of the most vigorous countries in Asia. Because of its advantageous geographic location, Singapore was called the Eastern Gibraltar by former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. In the west of the city lies an old Ford automobile factory, which has been turned into a permanent war museum by the Singapore National Archive. On February 15, 1942, Lieutenant General Arthur E. Percival, the British General Officer commanding Malaya, signed an instrument of surrender in this room to General Yamashita Tomoyuki, and Singapore was renamed Shonan, meaning island from the south in Japanese. Informed of the fall of Singapore, the then Japanese Prime Minister Tojo Hideki said pleasantly, "The capture of Singapore signifies the birth of a new Asia and a turning point in world history." Just 3 days after Singapore surrendered, Japan purged Chinese Singaporeans in revenge for their support of China's resistance war against Japan. Calling it a cleanup, they slaughtered many innocent civilians.
日本鬼子进来，就检证，就把我带去了。什么时候我们都不知道。用卡车送到一个集中的地方，全部要下车，下车就由他来指点，你站这边，你站这边，啊，那么如果不被杀的呢，就盖一个检字，检查的检 ，OK。
Born and raised in Singapore, 76-year-old Law Wen-ki is a member of the Singapore-China Friendship Association. One morning in early 1942, his father went to work as usual and never returned home. Despite a desperate search for his father, nothing was found, not even a body. At the time, Mr. Law was only 1 month old.
爸爸是一个受很高教育的，他有这个高等那个会计这个文凭的diploma。我这个在他那个 diploma 里面才看到，因为我们从来都没有看到，从来没有看到几眼呢。这个是最后的一个纪念，我的爸爸。你看他样子就是整个文人，他怎么样可以跟人家打架相骂呢？都不像这种人。
This is the last photo taken of Law's father. The one he held in his arms was Mr. Law's elder sister. That year, Law's father was just in his early 30s. This is Changi Beach in Singapore. It's now a holiday resort for locals and tourists to relax and enjoy themselves. Carefree children enjoy the sunshine and the beach. It's hard to imagine that 70 years ago, the beach served as one of the killing grounds of the Sukching massacre. Unarmed civilians were slaughtered before being tossed into the sea.
那个时候，那个日本鬼子那么凶恶，怎么样去反抗呢？真的每个都是有枪杆来指着你们。我们不是战斗的人。我们是一个平民，不幸运的， 就没有检制，就以为另外一条路走，原来那条是死路，日本鬼子给的死路。
The slaughter more than 70 years ago has been a lifelong wound for Law's family. Law's mother, who was recovering from childbirth, suppressed her grief and brought up 4 children despite bitter hardships. She never smiled again.
就是很痛苦了，含泪过生活。一个伟大的母亲。
The Tokyo trial judgment listed the location and time of over 100 massacres. These sites were spread across China and Southeast Asia. As the Tokyo trial was underway, national trials for Class B and Class C accused were held in Southeast Asian countries, adding more evidence of war atrocities to the Tokyo Tribunal.
We have to remember, at the same time that the Tokyo trial is going on, from 1946 to 1948, Australia, the Philippines, Great Britain, France, the United States, China are all conducting their national war crimes programs, doing investigations on a very large scale, and in many cases bringing that evidence before the Tokyo Tribunal in the war crimes phase of the trial.
The Japanese army committed atrocities against not only unarmed civilians, but also against medical staff and patients protected by the Geneva Conventions. Similar atrocities occurred in Hong Kong's St. Stephen's College Hospital. This video shows Canadian chaplain James Barnett's testimony at the Tokyo Tribunal. He told in detail of the atrocities Japanese soldiers committed in the hospital.
James Barnett. I am a chaplain in the Canadian Army Active Force. I was in St. Stephen's College Hospital at Stanley on the island of Hong Kong. About 6 o'clock in the morning of Christmas Day 1941, the Japanese troops entered that St. Stephen's College Hospital. I saw 5 Japanese soldiers bayonet 15 to 20 wounded men while they were still in bed. The 2 men who had been taken out of our room, their bodies badly mutilated, their ears, tongues, noses, and eyes cut away from their faces.
Patients of whom you have just been speaking armed?
None of the patients were armed, nor yet was the hospital staff, nor were there any armed troops in the hospital or around the ground.
Did you see any of the nurses?
They had been assaulted by Japanese soldiers, and one of them told me that she was forced to lie on 2 dead bodies and used by the Japanese as they chose.
What do you mean by the word assault?
They had been raped by the Japanese.
The defense did not dispute the abundant evidence of the atrocities, but claimed that the widespread massacres were perpetrated by officers in the field and had nothing to do with the Class A suspects tried in Tokyo.
The prosecution decided that they would try to show that there was an overall pattern of Japanese brutality that extended across the whole of the Asia-Pacific region and across the whole of the time of the war, and that this evidence of many, many atrocities would then be sufficient to show that the Japanese leaders must have known what was going on and should have taken action to stop them.
That's why they had to develop this theory of command responsibility. So what they could show was they could show the crimes, but they didn't have the orders. So what they said was, if you knew about them and didn't intervene, you have breached your duty.
In accordance with the command responsibility principle, the Tokyo Tribunal ruled that Matsui Iwani was responsible for the Nanking massacre, Kimuro Hayataro for the atrocities in Burma, Muto Akira for atrocities in Indonesia and the Philippines, Dowahara Kenji and Itagaki Seishiro for atrocities in Singapore and Malaya. All of them were executed for their war crimes. The tower of the Singapore Civilian War Memorial is over 70 meters high, situated in downtown Singapore. The monument was erected to commemorate the Singaporean civilians killed in World War II. Every year on February the 15th, rain or shine, the anniversary of the surrender of Singapore, Mr. Law comes to the monument to remember his father.
I'll 要纪念我的爸爸，所以我每年都要去。每次都是会流泪的，忍不住。上去拜祭的时候，鞠躬的时候，都自然而然的流泪。这种感情的事情，因为爱爸爸嘛，爱家庭也给他破坏了。新加坡最大的灾难就是这个日本减震这个事情，没有其他的更大的灾难。
In 1969, a strange film called Calling Australia was found in Australia's National Film and Sound Archive. Funded and sponsored by the Japanese government, the film purports to show the Japanese government respecting international law and treating prisoners of war to the best conditions one could imagine during wartime.
We are brought closer to home and our dearest ones, thanks to the full cooperation given us by the Nippon authorities. We hope that you will recognize.
In the film, Australian prisoners of war were allowed to eat steak, drink beer, go shopping, and even go swimming in the warm sun of Southeast Asia. Life in a POW camp was like heaven on earth. But was that really the case? This is Kanchanaburi in Thailand, 150 kilometers from its capital city, Bangkok. The province is surrounded by mountains and has beautiful scenery. The River Kwai flows quietly. But what attracts tourists from all over the world to this province is not only its outstanding natural scenery, but also the tragedies that had occurred there during World War II. In late 1942, Japan, which had been winning the war in the Pacific, decided to build a railway to support its operations in Burma and India. The railway ran 415 kilometers deep into the jungles and through the mountains. It would be used for delivering supplies from Thailand to Burma. Over 2 years, Japan forced 61,000 Allied prisoners and nearly 200,000 civilian laborers from the occupied territories to build the railway. By 1943, when the railway was finished, more than 100,000, or nearly half, had died because of torture and atrocious working conditions. The Burma-Siam Railway became known as the Death Railway.
Now, I've been coming here for many years into this area and always looking for things, because we get new records, we get new files, maybe a new story from a prisoner of war.
Australian Rod Beattie is a formal civil engineer. He came to Thailand for work in the 1990s. Rod, who served 6 years in the Australian Army, was keen on the history of World War II. He wondered why it would cost so many lives to build a railway, so he began his research. He's been doing it for 25 years.
We're now on top of the hill. You have to remove all the vegetation, all the trees any loose soil. Take that off, and then when you get down to the rock, then you have to start drilling and using dynamite. They would start off with just a steel drill, team of 2 men, one with the drill and one with a hammer. And we can see here in the rock the mark from the drill. So drill the hole, hit, 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 hit. Hard rock, hard work.
The construction of the Thailand-Burma Railway is widely recognized as one of Japan's 3 notorious atrocities in the Far East, the other 2 being the Nanjing Massacre and the Bataan Death March.
POWs were abused in many places, but probably the iconic one would be the Burma-Siam Railway, or the Death Railway. But also, the Burma-Siam Railway was a military project. And in addition to the atrocities committed and the appalling conditions that the POWs were subjected to, it's also a separate war crime to force a POW to work on military projects, because it's making you act against your own state. POWs can be made to work, but not for the war effort.
Today, visitors to Kanchanaburi are still able to use the Thai-Burma Railway built 70 years ago. Today, Rod Beatty once again takes the Thai-Burma Railway. He will head to the POW camps and tell of the living conditions of the prisoners back then.
So get all the information for wherever I can, and then come out here and then start walking and looking. Cholera broke out and the Asian labourers were dying, hundreds and hundreds of them dying. And they had no one to bury them or clean up all of the dead. So the prisoners of war, some of their work was collecting and burying the Asian dead. Many, many hundreds of Asians died over there. They are still there today. Now, because the Asians had cholera and they were using the water before the prisoners of war, then they polluted the stream. So when the water came down to the POW cookhouse here, they introduced the cholera to the POW camp. And about 115 prisoners of war died of cholera here.
There was a famous saying amongst Japanese soldiers, heaven is Java, hell is Burma, and no one comes back from New Guinea. If you were out in the jungle in Burma, you got malaria, you got dengue fever, you got horrible tropical ulcers. It was a terrible place to be out in the jungle in any circumstances.
On February 15th, 1942, the British Army in Malaya surrendered unconditionally to Japan. In the ceremony, the man with the white flag is a British soldier named Cyril H.D. Wilde. He served as an interpreter for the British during the signing of the capitulation. After being arrested, he was sent to Thailand as a prisoner of war. Wilde took the witness box 8 days in a row.
The accommodation in these huts, the allowance per man, was from 2 1/4 to 2 1/2 feet by 6 feet of wooden planking.
What were the walls made of?
The walls were made of some kind of palm leaf, which got very quickly eaten away by ants, and after a few weeks there were no walls.
Wilde also showed the maps indicating the location of the railway and POW campsite to the court.
First straight line to Bang Pong.
Although the old railway went up as far as Kanchanaburi.
Yeah. Well, now
5 points to the north of Bang Pong.
Yes. How many men were
confined in what space there in all?
By April 1942, our numbers had gone up to 4,500, and we were confined in a space about 130 yards by 180 yards square. There was no sanitation whatever when we arrived there, and no tools were provided for about a week to provide ourselves with any.
タイとビルマの間の鉄道は今行くともう道路ができてますけど、その時は熱帯のジャングルです。熱帯の雨季っていうのはものすごい雨が降る、川は流木がすごい、そういう中で工事を進めますから、どうしても病気になるでしょう。食料が足りない、医薬品が足りない、その中で労働だけは上からもとにかく完成期があれですから、その矛盾の幸せが捕虜に行く。ひどい時は骸骨が靴を履いてるっていう、それは鉄道隊の小隊長が日記に書いてる。
Who should be responsible for the torture of POWs? Prime Minister Tojo Hideki had ordered that all prisoners of war should be labourers. The order was given at a meeting of Army Ministry officials in 1942.
There was one case, what was called the work for food order, which was that POWs in certain areas, if they didn't work, including through sickness, they didn't get fed. Now that is undoubtedly a breach of the laws and customs of war. The order was a signed one by Tojo.
In May 1943, Tojo Hideki, as Prime Minister of Japan, visited Indonesia. Although mistreatment of prisoners had occurred in many areas occupied by Japan, Tojo, as the leader of the Japanese government, did not take any measures to address the issue.
Tribunal, please. I request that the defendant Tojo take the witness box.
On December 26, 1947, Tojo took the witness box.
Is that your affidavit?
Yes. In his written affidavit, which was 245 pages long, he accepted responsibility for mistreatment of POWs. However, in the court, Tojo argued that as war minister far away in Tokyo, he had no control over the atrocities in the Southeast Asian theatre. In the final verdict, the court unanimously ruled that Tojo was well informed of the barbarous treatment of prisoners and internees, yet took no adequate steps to punish offenders. Tojo, as the head of the Japanese government, bore full responsibility for the mistreatment of POWs and was executed for conventional war crimes. In order to let more people know the history of the Thai-Burma Railway, Rod set up the Thailand-Burma Railway Centre that houses the materials collected from his 25 years of research. Many tourists visit the centre to learn about the history and seek information on the deceased. Currently, information on 95% of the prisoners who worked building the Thai-Burma Railway can be found in Rod's Research Centre database.
I have 4 uncles buried around the world who have died because of war. So I know what it means personally to have lost family members. This is what I've been doing for 25 years now, is collecting all of this information from all around the world, putting it here into our research room. Very important. All of these men's stories are remembered.
In May 2018, Nuremberg Principals Academy convened a special forum at the original site of the Nuremberg trial. The subject of the forum, however, was not the Nuremberg trial, but the Tokyo trial on the other side of the planet. To mark the 70th anniversary of the adjournment of the Tokyo trials, experts from 12 countries, including the United States, Australia, Britain, Japan and China gathered together to discuss the legacy of the Tokyo trials and its historical significance.
Tokyo trial, together with the Nuremberg trial, actually the first manifestation of a universal approach based on more or less the same legal principles.
So the idea of looking at these old tribunals is to learn from history and to progress. The United Nations Security Council set up two tribunals, one for former Yugoslavia and the other for Rwanda. I was a judge on the Rwanda tribunal. Now, where is the Security Council going to get the laws? They looked at Nuremberg.
For too long, Nuremberg was in the spotlight and Tokyo was ignored, but they're both of equal importance.
The Nuremberg trials and the Tokyo trials for the first time introduced the charge of crimes against peace to the international legal system. The Tokyo trials made clear that individuals are also subject to international law, and those who wage aggressive wars shall be severely punished. On November the 12th, 1948, the Tokyo trials announced the final verdict on each of the individuals accused.
The International Military Tribunal for the Far East will now pronounce the sentences on the accused convicted on this indictment.
Accused Daihara Kenji, Terota Koki, Titagaki Seishiro, Kibura Eitaro, Matsui Awani, Tojo Hideki, on the counts of the indictment on which you have been convicted, the International Military Tribunal for the Far East sentences you to death by hanging.
僕は比較的そういう一方的ではあるけどね、やっぱり日本の戦争犯罪、戦争責任はね、やっぱり否定できないもんだし、東京裁判があったからこそね、その問題が明らかになって。
70 years have passed. How many of us could still remember the atrocities committed during the war? Former German President Richard von Weizsäcker once said, "Anyone who closes his eyes to the past is blind to the present." People today could still read the lines from the UNESCO Constitution. Since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defences of peace must be constructed.